to the second pilot week of our semester. This week we're going to talk about monopoly. I'm Mike Wenz and I'll walk you through the lecture. A monopoly is a type of industry structure where one firm supplies the entire market. Unlike perfect competition, where many firms provide a product to the market, monopoly has one seller who's selling a product with no close substitutes, and for various reasons which we'll talk about in a minute, other firms do not enter this market. It's easy to think about the market structures as lying along a continuum. At one end of the continuum you have perfectly competitive firms, which are price takers and face a perfectly elastic horizontal demand curve. At the other end of the spectrum, we have what we're going to talk about today, which is monopoly, where firms search for a price. They can raise it or lower it in response to changing conditions, and they face a downward sloping demand curve. One of the things that distinguishes different market structures is the degree of market power which firms have. At one end of the spectrum, we have perfectly competitive firms such as small farmers. Think of corn farmers or cranberry farmers that supply a very small share of the grand total market for their product. At the other end, we have a monopolist. We basically have one water company which we can buy our water from. And in the middle, we have things like soft drinks, where there are lots of different sellers selling somewhat different products, but it's still a competitive market with many close substitutes. Not perfect competition, but somewhere in between. We define market power as the ability of a firm to raise its prices without losing all of its customers. A monopolist faces the market demand curve, and so if they raise their price, the high demand customers will still buy from them. They don't have an alternative to go. If they lower the price, they can gain more customers, but they do so at the expense of higher prices to customers who would have purchased the product anyways. Any firm with downward sloping demand curves have some degree of market power. So a monopolist like the water company has a lot of market power. A soft drink company like Coke or Pepsi has some smaller degree of market power. Coke can raise their prices a little bit and lose some of their customers to Pepsi, but probably not all of them. The more close substitutes a firm has, the higher the degree of market power. And when we think about whether or not an industry is a monopoly, thinking about this degree of market power is important. What's important to note is that from the perspective of a perfectly competitive firm, their demand curve looks horizontal. Raising price a little bit and they lose all their customers. Lowering their price, well, there's no point because they can sell as much or as little as they want to at the going rate. On the other end, we have a monopolist. A monopolist faces the market demand curve, which is downward sloping. And you can think of firms with a varying degree of market power as facing relatively steeper or relatively flatter demand curves, depending on the market's demand elasticity and the number of close substitutes to that particular product. So monopolists face a downward sloping market demand curve, and firms with close but not perfect substitutes sit somewhere in between. The steeper the demand curve, the more market power. When we talk about monopoly and we talk about firms with downward sloping demand curves, a lot of the characteristics that we're going to learn about today are going to be consistent across firms in industries that are somewhere between perfectly competitive and monopolistic. Those firms in between, like soft drinks with downward sloping demand curves, are going to have behavioral characteristics that are very similar to monopoly and somewhat different from perfectly competitive firms.